Mute. You're mute.
Unmute, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's try this again. So, good morning to all of you who are joining us from the French Caribbean and from the English speaking Caribbean and anywhere else on this side. And good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from metropolitan France or from otherwhere in Europe, elsewhere in Europe. It is a pleasure to have you all here today. And we are so happy to be in this forum. Thank you to all of you viewers who are here today. For those of you who don't know, EduCaribe is an organization that has a primary mandate of sharing, disseminating information, especially information related to education and tertiary education, to persons, youth who are looking at options for pursuing tertiary education. And we are happy to have you all here. We are happy to have the students, those of you who are teachers or otherwise participants, or just eager to know some more about what EduCaribe is and more information about the education options that are here in the Caribbean. So today, I am Stephanie Sewell. I will be moderating this conversation, and I am joined today by four lovely individuals, three lovely women and one gentleman. We're joined by Dr. Diana Thorburn, if you could just wave for everyone to see. She is Director of Research at CAPRI Caribbean, that's the Caribbean Policy Research Institute. We're joined by Dr. Damian Black. He is the Commissioner at the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission. We're also joined by Jheanelle Bishop from the Laney Rose. Hi, thank you. And we're also joined by Laurina Algan-Gomes from Caribbean Hustler. Hi. So this is going to be a very informal but yet informative conversation. And I invite everyone that is here to just join in and ask questions, give comments. Wherever you see something that you want more information on, feel free to jump in and intervene. But before we go ahead into this lovely discussion and Q&A, I would just invite each of the participants to just give me maybe about a 5-minute presentation, not a serious presentation, but just a 5-minute presentation of who you are, the organization that you represent, and what it is that you come prepared here to speak to us about. I would like to open it. First of all, let's start with Laurina.
Okay, so hello everyone and good morning. I'm Laurina. I'm the founder of Caribbean Hustlers, which is an agency that promotes networking throughout the Caribbean. Our aim is to help entrepreneurs from the Caribbean gather, whether they are from the French Caribbean or the English Caribbean. We are helping them by giving them tools and also creating events for them to meet. So we are now based in Guadeloupe. I'm also a Saint Martiner, so I basically grew up in the Caribbean. Saint Martin is like French and Dutch, but also we are very open to English-speaking Caribbean. And yeah, I'm here today to talk about my experience when it comes to education in the Caribbean, whether is the English-speaking Caribbean and the French also education. So yeah, thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you so much. Dr. Thorburn, would you like to go next, Diana?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Stephanie. I'm really happy to be here. As Stephanie said, I'm the Director of Research at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI. We are an independent public policy think tank based at the University of the West Indies, Mona. We have been around for 15 years, and we do evidence-based research targeted towards improving public policy in 4 areas: the economy, governance, the environment, and society, which is, of course, very broad. And one of the reasons that we do so many different things is because we are the only game in town, and we would love some competition. So one of our dreams is to establish, whether it's other think tanks or other parts of branches of CAPRI in other parts of the Caribbean, because of the nature of our funding, most of our work is very Jamaica centric. Most of our funding, in fact, all of our funding comes from donors. Private sector donors provide our core funding. We're very fortunate that we're sustainable, we're in the black, and we don't have to worry about paying our light bill, which is, I say, because that is often the case for many civil society organizations in Jamaica. The space here is not very supporting and nurturing of nonprofits. Most of our research funding comes from donor partners such as the European Union, USAID, the Inter-American Development Bank, etc., et al. This study that I am here to speak about, or my input into today's conversation, is a study that we very recently completed on tertiary financing. CAPRI has done research on education, including tertiary education, before. Education is both a social issue and an economic issue in Jamaica. And this particular issue of tertiary financing is a thorny issue that has been unresolved in Jamaica and the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean, but more so Jamaica, for decades, literally for decades. The university is in a financial crisis. It threatens the viability of the university as a whole, but it particularly threatens the university's ability to deliver a quality education. So the research explored what would be the most viable, practical, and feasible ways of supporting the University of the West Indies in particular, but it applies to an extent to J-TEC, University of Technology as well, to deliver a quality education. And I want to be clear that we are talking about a quality education, because there's a lot that can be offered by anybody that is called education, but is not quality education. And so it's a very important modifier for the discussion insofar as I'm going to participate in it with regard to financing. So I look forward to sharing what we've learned, and I hope we can move the discussion forward here.
Thank you so much, Diana. Jheanelle, it looks like you're very eager to jump in. I'd like you to go next, and then Dr. Black, I'd ask you to just follow right after.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jheanelle Bishop. I started my company, Delaney Rose, about a year ago. Unlike most of you, it's completely different. It's actually about event and wedding planning, and I started that some time ago because I just had a change in passion. So part of my background is that I went to the Caribbean School of Architecture. I wanted to be an architect at the time, and that was the best school in the Caribbean to do so, especially the English-speaking Caribbean, as it was the only one in the English-speaking Caribbean. And then I later went to school in Florida. I went to Gainesville and did my master's in interior design. As you can see, I have chosen to leave that career field. But part of the reason I'm here today is just to share my experience as, a student who went through different financial channels to get to the point that I am today, how I funded J-TEC, and maybe even what my options were at the time when I was doing my degree in Jamaica. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to hear so much more about those experiences when we get to the next section of our discussion. Dr. Black, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate your sharing, and I want to commend all of you. And Jheanelle, I do understand and appreciate your journey. Just yesterday, I heard someone sharing. I'm presently in Barcelona. The World Higher Education Conference just concluded, and someone on the final day shared in terms of the future of work. So many of us went there expecting a listing of careers, in some fields in IT, augmented reality, etc. But he actually spoke about some very basic things, and one of which triggered a memory when I heard you speak. He said that very often he has heard people make the statement, follow your passions, and then, but he then said to me, he said that's dangerous. Who knows what their passion is? You really and truly come to this by virtue of engaging life seeing who you are, and so on. And I think that this is an important segue to introduce what I want to say here today is that part of the reality of the post-COVID, or well, COVID presently is ongoing, but post in terms of the critical phase that we went through with those significant waves, is that a reality of the downturn in academic mobility. And so this conversation about education in the Caribbean really has to do with issues of academic mobility, the extent to which we study within our national country borders, within the region, within the Caribbean, if we are able to cross geographically, and then certainly to know and understand what are the options. Throughout Latin America, throughout Europe, etc., many of the institutions have been significantly hit. And so it behooves us in the Caribbean to be able to make the case, generally and broadly, as to the opportunities here. The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission has executed research over the years. One of these CAPRI did on our behalf, which had to do with the cost of education right here in tertiary education in Jamaica. And it was a significant issue, research. And the issue of that I'd like to highlight from that research had to do with the fact that very often we think of the cost of education with a limited focus on tuition. But as CAPRI adroitly identified, the fact is the significant other costs just related to living, just being able to do and function outside of the classroom so that you can continue are significant. And so one of the baseline figures that we looked at was if you had to do a course at humanities or the social sciences, you're speaking of Jamaica, oh, let me just use US dollars, $2,000 a year. But then when you factor in the total living costs, you're about 5 times that. And so we do have to appreciate cost in terms of the whole package. And so CAPRI's recent report related to UWI and the costs and the issues that Dr. Thorburn just raised, significant for this conversation. But notwithstanding, we see the real value of an education in Jamaica. And so for those who may be online and considering their future options, Jamaica, the Caribbean, represents significant value. I was speaking with a colleague from Universities Caribbean, and they represent universities within the Caribbean region that all language domains, Dutch, the Netherlands Antilles. Our friend there, Laurina, from San Martin. So French, Spanish, and of course English. So we can see what this holds, but then certainly we look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Black. I feel like all of us are eager to hear a lot more about what was being discussed at that conference. I certainly, have heard of Universities Caribbean before, and I'm eager to find out more about what was discussed there. Thanks again to all of you for giving these brief introductions. I just want to start out the conversation, very lightly by, getting a bit into, what we are all here to discuss today, which is the cost of education in the Caribbean. And I think I'm going to start out by asking Laurina to just tell us a little bit more about the program that she has, and just kind of help us to understand what exactly it is that you do and how it is that you're able to penetrate the other markets of tertiary education, especially for students coming from your side.
Okay, so I grew up basically on the French side of Saint Martin, but we have a really close relationship when it comes to education on the Dutch side. So very, very early, I would say, in high school, let's say, we have what we call matière courses, where we have to meet with Dutch side students. We have like science fairs, and we have other events also. So we are very well in St. Martin. We are very open when it comes to education in the Caribbean, whether it's English-speaking countries and Dutch also countries. Knowing that St. Martin on the Dutch side, they are Dutch, but there is also a very close relationship with Curacao. So the French are very open when it comes to Curacao, San Martin, and Dutch. And I pursue my studies in France, well, in Martinique first, and then in France, in Paris, and then in Bordeaux. And I had also the opportunity to only visit, not study, but only have a little visit when it comes to the university in Jamaica, the West Indies University, right? Yes. I visited that once and it was very different. I would say it was very different from other universities in France. Um, I find it was very interesting to see that it was very multicultural. It was very how to say it? The history and the culture of the Caribbean were very present compared to France. France is very based on the studies of France, only the territories, and not necessarily on the Caribbean. And what I like with Jamaica is the fact that it was very focused on the islands of the Caribbean. What we do with students right now is we kind of help them and see what we can do when it comes to entrepreneurship in the Caribbean. Not necessarily help them choose their university, but have a vision when it comes to having a business and having a company focus not only on the French Caribbean, but also the English speaking Caribbean, the Spanish speaking Caribbean, and the Dutch speaking Caribbean. So what we do is little workshops for students. We can go in schools and here in Guadeloupe and help them see that they shouldn't limit themselves, and there are many options out there. And if they want to pursue a path in business, that they can, and it's possible also to do business with neighboring islands. I know for a fact that French people are not necessarily bilingual. They don't necessarily speak English or understand the accent, but for me, business has no border. Business can speak any kind of language. So we help them see that you can do business with your neighbor and you don't necessarily have to depend only on France or only on England or only on the States, but there are also potential clients and partnership possible in the Caribbean. So this is
Okay.
what we do.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm very thrilled about this idea, and I wish that I had known about this before. I'm not a business person by any means, but if I had an opportunity to launch something and know that there are avenues to get into the Dutch or the French Caribbean markets, that's something that I would be really enthused about. And to return a little bit more to the topic of education, though, I'm just wondering, anyone can chip in here if we can possibly have a discussion about the cost of education. Not just the cost of the individual, but how do the cost of education in Jamaica, for example, compare to the cost elsewhere in the Caribbean or even in the world? I don't know if Dr. Thorburn, the research that CAPRI did recently, touched on those costs, or if Dr. Black, you'd also like to jump in, please feel free. Or Dr. Thorburn, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think this is more for Dr. Black because we looked very specifically at the current subsidy and how it's working and not working, and in the context of the university's overall financial crisis, as opposed to looking at the comparative cost of education at UWI to other places. My understanding, but this is not from the research, this is just my understanding as a layperson, is that the full tuition cost at UWI is far lower than in the US or in the UK. So even if students who are now subsidized for 80% of the cost were to pay the full cost, it still would be far less than anywhere outside of the region, not including places like Africa and Asia. Dr. Black, I think you would probably be able to speak to this with much more competence than me.
Well, I would support what you just indicated there clearly. And let me just use one discipline, medicine. It's a colleague of mine from Grenada, St. George's University, spoke pointedly to the tuition costs there, that when you consider at 35,000 US, and this is about 3 or 4 years ago, so I don't know what it is currently. When you look at the living costs now, which you would then have to add to that, you're talking about of approximately 50,000 US dollars in Grenada. But that is still considered a bargain if you were to contrast that with the cost of studying in the US, for example. The fact of the matter is the cost of studying here throughout the region, from what I have seen, and I'm not just speaking now from my experience at Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, but also when I was in the working with the institutional administration, one of the things that we did at a particular institution was to engage an international body based in Berlin, Germany, that established a number of hubs around the world, and their bit was to assist institutions with international recruitment. And when we looked at our costs and we put them on the table, they were significantly below those of other competing entities. The critical issue, though, is the desirability of the Caribbean vis other contexts. That is the point. We are not challenged by virtue of our quality, the quality of our offerings. That is not in contention. I think that we have been in the forefront of quality assurance, external quality assurance efforts throughout the Caribbean. Jamaica, the University Council of Jamaica, our own agency, in Trinidad, what's it called, ACTI, Barbados Accreditation Council. Well, no, it's not ACTI in Trinidad. I'm forgetting the one there in Trinidad. Accreditation Council, ACT, correct, forgive me. But these entities, so the quality is not the issue, but rather it is just the desirability of North America. Now, the fact of the matter is the costs on average, all right, are about 40% of what it would be to study in the US. But many persons do indicate that having a US degree on their credentials, and then indeed also the whole issue of migration, is what they're looking for. If we had to look at other options now, not medicine now, but if we went down to your business administration degrees and so on, again, you're talking about significantly below, what it would cost to obtain an equivalent qualification. And so the issue has to do with whether or not we can compete with the brands that are on offer in North America. But there's no denying it that the costs here give a significant advantage to any person to fulfill his or her tertiary education dreams.
Right. And I saw Jheanelle nodding a while ago. It looks like you would also agree that the costs here are much more desirable than those in the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about, your experience financing education in Jamaica as compared to financing education in the States, and what the comparative costs would have been for you?
So I would agree with everything Dr. Black said, just because it's a vast difference in pricing and how that works. So maybe I should start with going to J-TEC. At the time, I didn't consider other options because I hadn't broadened my scope yet, and I was not thinking to move out of the country. And that was because I had my family there and I was content with what I thought I was going to pursue, which was a full-time architecture in my future. And so the natural choice was to go to the Caribbean School of Architecture. My husband now, he had a different experience in terms of that. So he came at the same time as I. So we started the program at the same time. However, he had looked into other options. He's from Barbados. And so, as I mentioned in my introduction, there are, say, one option in the English-speaking Caribbean for architecture school. I know there's another school. I'm not familiar with the name or the level of accreditation, but I know there's another school in either the French or Spanish-speaking Caribbean that allows architecture, has an architectural program. However, most students come over to Jamaica and it's a very competitive course. My husband had looked into schools in Miami, schools in Canada, and some other places too around the world. And by far, Jamaica had the best pricing, even though students from abroad do not pay what's called in-state or in-country rates. So my education was a lot more affordable than my husband's per se, because he's from another country. And Barbados government does not aid with educational fees the way Trinidadian government does. And so his fees compared to mine, first of all, to start, there's a vast difference. He paid much higher fees than I did. Mine was probably like in the 500,000s or the 400,000s per semester or per year, whereas his was somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 US per semester or a year. I can't remember what the fees were at the time, but so that's very different when you start to convert what I am paying to what he's paying. And to me, it seemed very expensive because of the resources I had. My parents did not have a nest egg sitting and waiting for me to go to college, as a lot of parents do not have, and a lot of people do not have. So what our options was to apply to SLB. And luckily, I found my guarantor. My parents were able to stand in and stand as guarantors. And so we were able to apply to SLB. We applied to SLB for my first year in terms of just my parents would pay immediately so that it would be more like a down payment, and SLB would give us at least 1 year upfront to pay for my schooling. However, that wasn't the option that we wanted to stay with. So for the following years, we did the traditional route. Most people choose the route where you'll apply to SLB, and once you are through with your education is when you are expected to start paying back that money.
Thank you. But I just want to know, I mean, especially for the viewers who are not Jamaican based, if you could just tell us what SLB is. And I don't know if Dr. Thorburn or Dr. Black also want to jump in and just give us an idea of what exactly the SLB is, the Students Loan Bureau, and how this system works, and who this system prioritizes, or who this system is targeted for.
So this system, from my understanding, is targeted for tertiary level education. And so a lot of students who have left high school are looking for funding, government, funding that is more readily available to kind of assist them through the process of paying for tertiary level education. And then they will pay that institution back once they have finished with their schooling. And Dr. Thornburg or Dr. Black can jump in and kind of help me out.
Well, I'll just speak to, and I think this will give me an opportunity to talk a bit about the research. So the Student Loan Bureau lends money for tertiary education, and you start to repay. The interest rate, I believe, is lower than commercial bank loans. You have to have a guarantor. And those loans go towards paying the portion of your education that is not subsidized by the government. And I want to bring this up with regard to what Jheanelle said about what she paid and what her husband paid. So the Jamaican government currently subsidizes for public institutions 80% of tuition for students. So Jheanelle may have been paying less than her husband being from Barbados, but that's because Jamaican taxpayers were paying the rest of it. So it's not that her fees were lower, it's what she had to pay was less because of her Jamaican citizenship. There are some of the Caribbean countries, she mentioned Trinidad, which have a different financing model for tertiary, where they will subsidize or sometimes pay 100%. The model has changed slightly because of it's gone through some changes in the past, very recent past, where they will pay tuition regardless of the institution, whether it's a private or public institution. I understand that one of the reasons that the model has changed is because there were concerns about the quality of what was being delivered at some of the private institutions, because those are not as well regulated and accredited, which is what I think Dr. Black was speaking to earlier in terms of quality control at private educational institutions everywhere in the world is far less rigorous than at established universities such as UWI and J-TEC. What the big weakness of the Student Loan Bureau is, I mean, there are several weaknesses. One of the interesting things that came out in the research was the interview with the chairman of the Student Loan Bureau, who essentially said, and so we quoted him in the study, that it's run very, very badly and it gives terrible service. Just on social, if you're in the Jamaican social media space, Student Loan Bureau is a common topic about how difficult it is to deal with them, how unreasonable it is, how unwieldy, they're not technologically advanced, etc. So those are known issues with regard to SLB, but those are more superficial issues. The real problem with SLB has to do with the non-repayment of loans, which takes place because of the very high percentage of people who migrate. 85% of Jamaican tertiary graduates migrate. And the fact that we do not have a mechanism for collecting loan repayments once people have left the jurisdiction. This is perhaps a fundamental policy change that needs to occur, regardless of what loan model or subsidy model is being pursued. We can talk more in detail if we get the chance to about what we proposed in terms of the type of loan. We proposed an income contingency loan. But regardless of whether they stay with the current loan model or move to that loan model or any other, until they fix that problem of collecting from people who have migrated, we will continue to have the gross inequity that currently exists, whereby all taxpayers fund 80% of university students' education in a context where the only people who qualify for university education are already from the higher socioeconomic quintiles, and they then leave with that education to elsewhere, so that there isn't even the benefit of having a more educated population. So there's an argument that yes, all taxpayers should pay fund tertiary, because then we live in a more educated society, which uplifts everybody. Rising tide lifts all boats, except that those boats leave and the tide stays low. So it's currently a very inequitable situation, but that very technical aspect of loan collection from those who have left is a key factor to take into consideration as to why we are in this situation. And the real threat that is currently faced by the university, there's only so much in terms of quality that the university is going to be able to continue to deliver when it is losing lecturers. It's losing quality lecturers because the salaries just cannot compete. Basic benefits that used to be taken for granted by UWI lecturers are no longer able to be taken for granted. Simple things like health insurance. And those are very real problems that the university faces now because of its financial crisis. And this is a long-term, this is not new. This has been long unfolding, brewing issue, and it needs significant policy change to remedy it, and very realistic and pragmatic policy change, which is what CAPRI has put forward.
Thanks, Diana. I really want to continue on this topic of our loan scheme, especially Jamaica's revolving loan scheme. But for the benefit of our viewers from the rest of the Caribbean and the rest of the world, I just want to check in with Laurina just to find out what kind of tertiary education loan schemes exist outside of Jamaica or the English-speaking Caribbean. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So on the Dutch side, there is also a university, the University of St. Martin. And it's basically also the same functioning as Jamaica. You have a loan according to your parents' resources. That loan you will have to pay back as soon as you graduate from the University of the Dutch side of St. Martin. And there are also a lot of debate when it comes to that, because if I can recall very good, it's between 6 and 7 thousand per semester. And also a lot of graduates, they have to leave the island to find a job. So there are many debates when it comes to that on the Dutch side of St. Martin, whereas on the French side, you do not have a loan, but you have what we call a bourse, a scholarship, right? That the state have to give to you to study to a French-speaking country. It could be Guadeloupe, it can be Martinique or France. But the Dutch side, yes, you have to subscribe to that loan. Afterward, you have to pay back the state. A lot of students, when it comes to that, do not necessarily do studies in St. Martin, necessarily do not stay, or they migrate to Holland because it's Dutch. But when it comes to paying back the loans in St. Martin, the salaries are very low. Many graduates may find work, but they have to work 2 to 3 jobs to pay back that loan. So it's very, very kind of similar as Jamaica. The Dutch side of St. Martin are very independent from the Kingdom of Holland. So they kind of, let's say, how to say it in English, is they kind of um, determine what kind of loan and also the amount of loan that each person have to have according to the parents' resources. So it's a topic that comes back a lot on the island. Even though we are not French, we also know that on the other side of the border, it's a topic that's very important.
Thank you. I find that such an interesting model that they link the amount of the loan to your parents' resources. But that really just has me wondering, what in the event that is there a possibility that the amount of the loan would not cover the cost of tuition for a student? So how would parents otherwise be able to finance, or students be able to otherwise finance their tertiary education?
So you have a loan when it comes to the say, but you also have like a little scholarship. Let's say per month you have 500 or 400 a scholarship, but you also have your loan. And when it comes to paying back, it's no longer on your parents' name, but on your name. And your parents are the guarantor, the guarantor. Yes,
Guarantors.
yes,
Okay,
exactly.
okay. So in
So
in most cases
the
then,
payment will be on your name.
right.
Also, if each month you have payments, and you cannot have that payment, well, your parents will have to pay for you. So this
Right.
is how the side works. And I'm sorry, but I cannot recall the name of the loan, which is Dutch, I do not know. But I know that I have many friends and family that went through that process and are now paying back each month, or their parents are helping them pay back the state of St. Martin.
Okay, thank you. That sounds very similar to the model here. But I think one critical difference is that we do have, I think, a roughly 6-month moratorium on loan repayments in Jamaica. So students have up to 6 months after they graduate to begin paying back the loan, depending on which type of loan that they took. Dr. Black, I think, you know, J-TEC tends to do a lot of research each year. They do surveys and collect data generally on student experiences in tertiary institutions. Can you tell us anything about what J-TEC has found in regards to students with UTEC and loan repayments or other, you know, other loan facilities that students have been taking?
Well, let me answer you by speaking to what Dr. Thorburn spoke about earlier in relation to just the reality of the UE, but a UE Mona, you know, Jamaica major challenge. This is not to say, you know, there are challenges system-wide financially, but point to Jamaica, as I believe the study indicated, I don't remember the percentage, was it 60% of the overall debt? 60?
Yes, it is. And Jamaica and Mona is in a far more parlous state than Cave Hill or St. Augustine or any of the other campuses.
Yeah, and Five Islands and so on. I think that what I want to say to you, Stephanie, in response to your query, is what the CAPRI's recent study highlights and what Dr. Thorburn just shared. We have got to come to grips with this issue because it's a matter of the future. You see, the issue won't be felt. I'm sorry, we won't deal with the issue 5 or 10 years when we have to do it now in order to ensure the appropriate flow of resources, dealing with the issues of governance, dealing with some of the matters, whatever these may be, but they have got to be addressed. The fact of the matter is, in looking at what we have seen, when one of the outcomes of our research in terms of this completion, students completing a program with a cohort. So if you look at it over, say, a 4-year period, using that as a sort of benchmark for a completion of a degree, first degree, what we see is that 59% of those who started complete on time. 79% from year 1 to year 2 would advance. But by the end of the 4th year or so, 59% of the group that started in the first year complete. Let me not say graduate, but complete and complete successfully. And the critical issue is, of course, finance. And so this is the challenge that face the institutions, certainly in Jamaica. And one of the things why the internationalization strategy a few years ago was one that was deemed to be critical in terms of just looking at how can we position our institutions, emphasize quality, and so on. Dr. Thorburn is better able to speak to it, but I believe part of Sir Alice, no, I'm sorry, not your Chancellor, oh gosh, Sir Hilary Beckles, beg your pardon, Sir Hilary Beckles, in looking at it, you know, an appropriate strategy, you know, reputation, but then he said that the reputation is affirmed. How can we now deal with the issue of revenue, so that you can then look at how you treat with and ensure the quality, but it's really about the continuation of the system, eh? And so the Students' Loan Bureau is challenged in terms of its management through time, just its basic systems, as has been articulated through the report, just being able to deal with those who receive the loans, don't pay, the challenge of guarantors. So the government has had to modify that, looking at the one guarantor, looking at no guarantor, but then linking the loan to you. And as Laurina said, the loan is to the individual, but then, you know, you still have the guarantor, you still have the payment, the parents. And so how do we treat with this? How do we modernize that system? There's no denying the need for infusion of funding, but the improvement of the management systems at the Students' Loan Bureau is going to be critical, even as we look at the system here. So the financial situation is there. The quality of the educational system is sound, we feel. COVID would have hit us significantly, but the institutions were able to adjust, which is important, to the new demands on the system. Certainly, you know, you look now at the national infrastructure in terms of the national fiber network, you know, the connectivity issues, where you are and how you can connect and so on. But I do believe that there's greater strength within the system as a whole. One of the things that, as we're looking at the Caribbean, as we move forward, and certainly coming out of the conversations here in the conference, the matters of access, equity are top. All the regions of the world, all right, all the regions of the world singing the same song: access, equity. How can we ensure the resilience of the institutions, the systems, you name it? You cannot get away from that basic matter here. And if it is that we're speaking about the development of the Caribbean, then what CAPRI raised in its report, focusing on funding, and I heard some of the discussion on the not beyond the headlines, Dion's TV program there, all angles, and looking at the whole matter of shifting and investing in research, and then making sure that that is solid, that strong center. Again, this is part of the fact that the institutions that are doing well, are those that have a strong research core, and can then you leverage that to appeal. And so this has got to be part of the strategic view of everything. Strengthening the Students' Loan Bureau, making the appropriate investments in the institutions, certainly looking to shore up in the short term the research capacity, and then looking out. We have got to, unfortunately, I don't think we can do this, spread ourselves so thinly that we're trying to look at all institutions that we have in Jamaica. We have got to do and appreciate, where we can to specialize and support.
Right. So I want to just kind of conclude this segment on, the revolving loan fund, the SLB, by just asking Dr. Thorburn just to give us the main recommendation coming out of CAPRI's report on reforming, and as Dr. Black mentioned, on strengthening the SLB. But before I ask you to respond, I just want to highlight the persons that are in our chat today. Hi, Rochelle, Manny, Keisha, Orly, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for joining. And please feel free to send your comments in the chat. I also invite you to just share which institution you're coming from, which institution you're interested in, or which institution you're currently attending. But while I look out for your comments, go ahead, please, Diana. Let us know, what exactly has CAPRI recommended?
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, we made 3 main recommendations, but I think underlying all 3 of them, and kind of saying more crudely what Dr. Black was saying, is that we have to dispense with magical thinking. There's magical thinking that the government owes people an education, that the government, specifically speaking of the Jamaican government here, that the Jamaican government can afford to pay for people's education. Those are impractical ideas that do not have a place in the contemporary context of Jamaica, and they have never had a place in the context of Jamaica. One of the reasons why the university is in the fiscal crisis that it is in is because it did do free education in the 1970s. It has never recovered from that. I think the other aspect of this dispensing with magical thinking is this idea that there's such a thing as free education, that this idea that the university providing an education to people is free is a myth. And people really need to come to terms with the fact that it is taxpayers who pay for that education. And it's particularly in the case of Jamaica, and particularly with the dynamic of high migration, it's a very inequitable situation where the better off continue to be better off, and the poor continue to remain poor and become poorer as a result of the situation. The 3 main recommendations reflect the roles of the private sector, the government, and the private sector, meaning the business sector, and students themselves with regard to financing the University of the West Indies to provide a quality education. The first 2 are easy. The role of the private sector in terms of philanthropy is to contribute to the university. All successful universities are dependent on philanthropy. The most famous universities in the world are famous because of their endowments, which is what they run their university on. Even with their high tuition, they are not able to run, the Harvards and the Oxfords without private contributions. The research found that there is something called a matching fund scheme that has been very successful in several countries. We recommend the university's fundraising arm consider that model. We think that it would work well if it's properly executed. The role of the government, of course, the government plays a role in supporting and financing tertiary education, but not in the way that it currently does, which is to provide the subsidy, the 80% subsidy. Dr. Black mentioned that one of the recommendations was that the university be financed, in terms of how the university is financed by the government, that financing comes in the way of support towards research, which again, the leading universities in the world are known for their research, that will not only contribute to enhancing the university's reputation, which has a multiplier effect on increasing private sector donations, but it's also an important developmental priority for all of the Caribbean, is for us to have our own research base on which everything else follows. And secondly, to provide living grants for needy students on a needs basis. Just as Dr. Black said in the earlier research that we partnered with them on in terms of the real cost, it's not just the tuition, it's also the living expenses. So we consider that those should be the areas where government financing should be directed, bearing in mind the context that education is already the largest line item in Jamaica's budget. Nobody can accuse the Jamaican government, and regardless of administration, of education not being a priority. It is a stated priority, and there has been money put behind that statement. The issue is, where is that financing going? It needs to go to basic and primary education, which is very low quality in Jamaica, and which, again, going back to the equity issue, continues to disadvantage those in the lowest socioeconomic quintiles. Finally, with regard to students, what is their responsibility? We propose that students pay 100% of the cost of their tuition, and that they do this, whether if they cannot do it with their own savings or their family's funding, that they take out a loan for 100% of the cost of the tuition, which they begin to pay back once they get a job, not within 6 months of completion, once they get a job. And it is a proportion of their income that is repaid, not a set amount. So it's an income contingent loan scheme, meaning that the loan repayment is contingent on your income. And that would be calculated based on several factors, market interest rates, the state of the economy, the prospects for employment, all of that would be factored into what that actual, what the actual details of that loan scheme would be, but it would be contingent. This model has shown to be very successful in several other countries around the world, and particularly for Jamaica, it is the most equitable model in terms of moving towards greater equity in society. Because as I said earlier, education is a societal issue and it's an economic issue. But I have to come back to that point about collecting repayments from those who have migrated. Dr. Black mentioned the all angles discussion, which was quite interesting, because one of the participants in the discussion was very vociferous in her point that why should we expect people to pay for their education and not to migrate when there are no jobs here? This proposal factors that in. It does not matter where the student goes for this model to be viable and for the university by extension to be viable. So that's quite well taken care of within the proposal, but it's that very important element that the Jamaican government needs to figure out, or the university needs to figure out, whether it is that they enter bilateral treaties with governments where people typically migrate to, or they engage private credit firms to collect. There needs to be a way to collect from those who have migrated. And in fact, that could actually have quite a positive effect, because people leave because there aren't jobs. There's no denying that. And they are much better paid overseas. The relative lower cost of an education here means that those who migrate and get jobs there are going to be able to repay those loans in no time. Far sooner than they would have to repay a student loan that they would have taken out if they had gotten educated there. So there's a lot to the proposal that I think people are not really understanding. And of course, people hear that, you know, we want students to pay the full amount of their tuition, and we can barely afford the 20% we are doing now. This is why we have to go to Ukraine where it's cheaper. And it's because Ukrainian taxpayers are paying for your education. Just as Jamaican taxpayers cannot afford to, the Ukrainian government has figured out a way for their taxpayers, because no university, no quality university can deliver quality education on a commercial basis. It's just simply impossible. And we have to understand that from that premise, that a quality education is extremely expensive. And those who are benefiting the most from it, which are the students, are the ones who ought to be the ones paying for it.
Right, right. And you know, Diana, just reflecting on the model that you've spoken about, I don't think that we need a huge reform of the SLB. I don't even think that we need to, I mean, in order to pursue these kind of bilateral relationships in other countries, in order to have loan repayments, you know, when students migrate. I think, as you mentioned in your introduction, this is a system that we have been doing research on for many, many years. I'm pretty sure well in excess of a decade. And I'm sure it's not the first time either that we have thought, look at the number of students that are migrating. Why would it be so hard, you know, to link this loan to, you know, whether it's our tax registration number or otherwise, so that we can continue allowing students to, you know, repay their loan from overseas. And again, you know, I appreciate this idea of an income contingent loan scheme, especially because of how it will correct some of the inequities that, you know, we have been complaining about before. But I'm aware of the fact that we are almost running out of time, and it would be so remiss of me to not mention that CARAIBE is actually one of the institutions that provide this kind of information for students who are looking at options for financing education. And if you go on their website, you would actually be able to find a lot of this information and more information on the support that they provide to students. I was also recently informed that within the French Caribbean, they have pretty affordable tertiary education, ranging from anywhere between 2,000 to about 5,000 euro, which would work out to be something, I think that would be comparable to the cost of education in Jamaica, maybe around 300,000 per year, if my math is correct. And, you know, which is very, I think that's quite reasonable, especially if you compare it to the cost of studying overseas, as Dr. Black and Jheanelle mentioned earlier. There is even a student that they mentioned who is coming from overseas, who is also studying in Trinidad now and is only paying about 5,000 euro. But, you know, in France, for example, I think that their studies also range from about 7,000 to 8,000. And in some institutions, they even link the tuition to the students' resources or to the family's resources. So again, different models are finding different ways to restore equity in the education funding. Now, Laurina, I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit more about, you know, how education is funded on the government side in France, including in the French Caribbean. What facilities does the government put in place? What is it that is paid for by the government? I was wondering if you could just tell us, especially about maybe student opportunities that are available.
Well, there are what we call AIDES, help from the states. When it comes to Saint Martin, French Guyana, Martinique, and also Martinique and Guadeloupe, you can ask the state for help. All you have to do is fill up a file with the studies that you are going to do, and also your future product or your future project. And there are also scholarships from the cruise. Le Cruz, it's an institution not run by the state, but it's separate from the state. And from the cruise, what you have is a scholarship every month that you do not have to pay back. And it's also depending on the resources that your parents have. It can be from €0 if your parents are winning a certain amount of money each year, and it can go up to €500 per month. And it helps students to have like a dorm when it comes to the university, but also buy groceries, buy books and objects like computers to work on. And at the end of the school year, that's everything I'm saying right now is in the public schools. At the end, when you graduate, you don't have to pay back. Now, when it comes to private schools, it's the same system as the American system, the Caribbean system, etc. What you have to do, most students, they take out private loans because it's very expensive. It goes from 2,000 per year, and the highest I have seen, for instance, in the Caribbean, the highest I have seen is 5,000, whereas in France is it can go up to 10,000 a year. Um, and what you have to do is take out loans, and the parents are the guarantors. And when as soon as you're done graduating, I think also you have up to 3 years to pay back the bank because it's not how you say it, it's not a loan from the state, but from the bank that you have to pay back. So you have up to 3 years. Um, I'm watching the chat. Yes, you have to have, well, if you're in a public space for school, you can ask for help to your collectivity. The collectivity is, we can say the state of Saint Martin or Guadeloupe or also Martinique. You don't have to pay them back. But there are also loans that you can ask from the state that you have to pay back at the end of your studies. So the private and public studies in France and in the French Caribbean is very different from other island because whether, well, it depends because you have to take out a loan when it comes to private, or you have to ask for help from the state when it comes to public. So yeah.
Thank you. And we are just about at the end of this discussion. Time flew by so quickly, but I really enjoyed this discussion. And just as we wrap up, I just want to ask everyone to give maybe about 30 seconds, just, your closing remarks on the areas that you're focused on. And if you want to give a word of advice to the students that are listening, please feel free. Let's start with Dr. Black.
Okay, thank you. I know the conversation has really revolved around, some of the challenges in affording the education. That notwithstanding, and we do have throughout the Caribbean, irrespective of language or context, historical issues that relate to access and equity. And the governments over time have tried to implement programs to address same. In Jamaica, as it is now, we were at a point of about 29% in terms of the ratio, the gross enrollment ratio. I think that has been affected by COVID. And certainly, whilst we were trending in some bit of our research about 30, but I think it's below the 28% now. So that underscores the challenge that we face in terms of being able to facilitate education. And so all options need to be on the table, and CAPRI is commended. I think as well, looking at the Patterson Commission report and what it has spoken to, yes, we need to address the lower levels, and at the same time, the health of the entire education sector is dependent on the health of the tertiary sector. And so we cannot avoid that link nor that relationship. The value of an education, what it costs in the Caribbean, is still by far a better option for persons within the Caribbean outside of those on the scholarships, multi-scholarships, and so on. The US is going through some significant challenges now, you know, the rent crisis. So the options of going off campus. I mean, it's the cost, what's happening globally. You know, it does say to us, look at the options here. Quality is guaranteed throughout the Caribbean. We know that. The history of external quality assurance, the reports, our graduates, when they go overseas, the comparison, you name it, research data, the rankings, all indicate the quality to be obtained here. It's a better option. We can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jheanelle, please let us have your closing remarks and any advice that you have.
Thank you. So I would just say I agree with Dr. Black in that I find that the Caribbean definitely offers a more affordable solution to tertiary education. Plus, one thing I think is without a doubt, the quality is very good. I mean, you may or may not experience lecturers or teachers that aren't as, I'd say, forgiving in terms of, you know, because I think our system is very hard. The Jamaican educational system at tertiary level can be rough, you know. And if you get out of that with good grades and you finish your degree, anywhere you go, you'll be successful. I can tell you that much. For example, when I was in school, I finished and I learned a lot of invaluable things that I can use even now, even though I've changed my career and I am able to deal with any kind of resource issues because I've learned to be so resourceful being in the Caribbean. I think that's one of the biggest things. Even though the Caribbean might not have all the resources that on paper would look so appealing compared to America, there is a level of discipline that you learn to find resources and find what you need to get through your education. And once you have done that, you'll be very successful. That's just my takeaway.
Thank you. Laurina, what do you have to say?
So I forgot to mention that there are also regional help from the states. When it comes to the tourism, it's called the CTO Caribbean Tourism Organization that students can apply to. And also to finish, I will say that students should not hesitate when it comes to studying, especially French students. Do not hesitate when it comes to studying in the Caribbean. I agree with all what you both said. There is a quality when it comes to studying in the Caribbean, and a lot of people come from abroad just to experience it. So do not look at it like something that will not help you succeed. On the contrary, I first studied here before going abroad, and I often say that I was very lucky to do it. I was very lucky to stay in an environment where I knew already, and it can allow you also to discover another culture. Maybe we're from the island, but we're also very different. So if you choose to study in Trinidad or Tobago or also Barbados, you can learn something new when it comes to the Caribbean culture. So I would tell honestly a student to do not hesitate and look for information. Look at Lives from EduCarib and you will have all the informations you need. Do not hesitate and send messages or call also. And when it comes to affordable universities in the Caribbean, I will say the French system, do not hesitate and book a meeting with a bank, because you never know if a bank can have an interesting offer when it comes to studying elsewhere in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Laurina. And Diana, can you give us your closing remarks and any advice that you have?
Yeah, I think I want to just pick up on all three of the remarks that we've had. First is Dr. Black. Yes, we enjoy high quality, but that quality is threatened unless we resolve the crisis, particularly at UWI and Mona. I would say to Jheanelle, yes, going to UE or UTech teaches you resilience, but I would like to think that you should enjoy your university education more than having to be battering. I I find that very, very sad when I see on, particularly on Twitter, when people post their graduation photos, they post these beautiful photographs. And the captions are like, you tried to beat me, but I managed to survive you. Or 3 years of hell gone. I will try to forget these years. That's not good. That's not something that we need to be working to change that. I mean, that of course requires not just changes to the financial situation, but a cultural change at the university, away from this idea that people should be struggling to get through their education. No, they should not. I hear what you're saying. And when I was a lecturer there, my heart would go out to my students. And even now I meet some of them, and their experience of UE in particular, I can't speak to UTech, has been one of a great deal of struggle. And that just bodes ill for alumni dedication to the university in the long run. So there is, I think, a broad need for a cultural change, but that's not this discussion. That's a whole other discussion. And then, based on what Laurina said, and this has nothing to do with the research, I'm going to speak about my personal experience. I was very, very fortunate to attend UWI at St. Augustine and a little course thing that I did at Université des Antilles in Martinique. And I am so grateful to those experiences for making me a Caribbean person. Also, they were the most fun times of my life. So I really appreciate EduCaribe's effort to broaden information about education in the Caribbean. My own children, I would encourage them to explore educational opportunities throughout the Caribbean, not just the other campuses of UWI, but all throughout the Caribbean, because it's a really great feeling to be a Caribbean person and studying throughout the region and living in other parts of the region really consolidate that, especially when you come from Jamaica with our superiority complex that we don't need anybody else and we kind of control the thing. And it's not, trust me, those Jamaicans who think that, no, there's a lot to learn and experience from the rest of the Caribbean that is very beautiful and very enriching at every level.
Thank you, Diana. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. I feel like I want to just crop that, little, those closing remarks that you had and drop into our conversation on Monday, where we actually do speak about studying in the Caribbean. That live is called Why Choose the Caribbean. And I feel like all of the discussions here today would be so valuable then too. So I invite all of our viewers to also tune in to the rest of the events in Success Week. Also shamelessly plugging the other one on Monday that I will be moderating that I just discussed. But thank you again to all of the persons that were in the comments, to Deidre and Nelson. Hopefully we can touch on the community colleges and the other options in the Caribbean on Monday and throughout the rest of this event. I'd like to thank all of you participants again for taking this hour and change to speak to us and for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and the research, as well as the recommendations that have been put forward. Again, please feel free to consult EduCaribe's website for more information on studying options, as well as for funding options, and just general information on studying in the Caribbean. I hope you all have a pleasant rest of the day, and we'll see you again at the next EduCaribe Success Week. Bye.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good. All the best.
Thank you. It was nice being a part of this. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining. Bye.
I actually don't know how to leave.
There's something at the bottom that says Kitty you.